So Unit 2 is going to be broken up into two different parts. So the first part of this is chapters 3, 4, and 5. So when we look at this, career success begins with knowing yourself. And chapter 3 is going to focus on understanding our own communication styles, the strengths and weaknesses of different communication styles, and then how we can kind of use this to adapt our behavior and kind of meet the needs of others. So again, how can understanding your own communication style help you improve your communication with others? The things that you should be able to do by the end of this chapter is one, explain the concept of communication style and then the way it affects personal relations. Major elements of the communication style model. Identify your own personal preferred communication style and then be able to improve communication with others through flexing your style to other people's. So when you look at the tip of the iceberg piece and read through it, we all kind of have this unconscious bias where we favor certain people because of personality or because of communication, and that's kind of normal. The problem becomes when that can impact whether or not we get hired or how we get reviewed on our performance at work, because sometimes you just got communication and personality styles that kind of butt heads with each other, but that shouldn't influence our ability to evaluate someone's work or ability to work. When you look at what Camille Wright Miller talks about with effective leaders are able to mirror or match our own communication style, or good leaders do. They match their communication styles to meet the needs of others. And more research has shown that humans are kind of hardwired to do this. Babies, for example, very early on learn how to mirror the emotions of their parents, particularly their mothers. When mothers are happy, the babies are smiling and they're happy, and it kind of goes hand in hand. And so pretty early on, our neurons get wired to do that, or it may even be kind of inborn. When you look at communication styles and the intro to all of this, when they define it, basically, when you look at communication style, it's the way other people observe our behavior, what they can see, what they can hear. The advantages of understanding our own communication style is one, we become more self-aware. Two, we can kind of pick up on and become more sensitive and tolerant to others. And then three, we're able to kind of develop a more effective relationship with other people, whether it be at work or in our own personal lives. And I already talked a little bit about this bias, is we tend to have this preference for working with people who have similar styles. And those people who have very different styles or levels of intensity, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, makes it a little bit more difficult. So personality and your communication style. Personality after the age of really 25 to 30, that becomes fairly well set and stable. When you look at communication style, that is something that's an acquired behavior, in other words, a learned behavior. And some of it is probably impacted a little bit by personality, but we can modify it. We can learn to adjust it and adapt it. And the other thing too is as you're going through this, you'll be thinking to yourself, well, yeah, but this is my preferred style, but when I'm in this situation, I act this way, and when I'm in that situation, I act that way. And that's totally normal too, is we tend to not just be one communication style, and we adapt kind of our communication style to the situation a lot of times. So when we look at what are kind of the key concepts in terms of supporting communication style, we all have our own different way of communicating, and those are all important. Each of us kind of uses our own gestures. We kind of all have our preferred length of eye contact, level of assertiveness. And these styles, again, get to be pretty consistent. So we kind of get set into our ways of doing things. And according to Jung, there's limited number of styles, like 4 styles: sensing, feeling, intuiting, and thinking. And that can get kind of broken out, because sometimes you'll see really this broken up into 16 pieces, but all within kind of those 4 quadrants. Um, and another key thing is that there isn't a best way to communicate. And it's not a criticism of how well you communicate, but what the communication style is more like how you want to, how you're comfortable communicating. And being able to mirror other people and being able to identify other people's styles and adapting to those can give you a big advantage in terms of getting hired, in terms of being successful in the workplace, in terms of being successful in personal relationships with others. There's all kinds of advantages to being able to identify, understand, and then adapt and adjust. So we're going to look at 2 different things. We'll talk about dominance first, sociability last. When you look at dominance, those descriptors on the left describe people who are low dominant. The descriptors on the right are high dominant. And, again, sometimes I think people view dominance and sociability, if they're low in it or high in it, they can kind of think in their heads that they have this preconceived notion of it being a bad thing to be high dominant or a bad thing to be low dominant. And really just what it is when you go into a situation, how likely are you to take control, or how likely are you to sit back and watch? And that's a better way to kind of think of it. Where should you be on the dominance continuum, and when and how should you flex? It doesn't really matter. There's successful people who are low dominant and successful people who are high dominant. You really need to figure out how to take your preferred communication style and make it work for you. If you are low, you need to know when to step up and be a little bit more assertive, and when it's high, you need to know when to step back a little bit. So the sociability continuum, those people with high sociability tend to express and be very open and talkative, whereas low sociability, you see them kind of sit back and be more reserved. They tend to be a little bit more formal. And again, you can be anywhere. People of high sociability, low sociability, it really doesn't matter where you fit in there. It can be successful, and it can work to you, to your advantage, just by understanding the way it works. In general, what we tend to find is we tend to be in one of these 4 quadrants, and those are the ones that are most like you, and there's the ones that are least like you. There's no one best successful style. The most successful people, again, are the ones who make their styles work for them. So when we look at the emotive style, they are high sociability and high dominance. They tend to be pretty spontaneous, tend to be considered an extrovert. A lot of times, because of the dominance and sociability, they're pretty persuasive. I guess in a lot of ways, you kind of think of maybe a salesperson. When you look at directive, they tend to be very serious. They tend to have kind of strong opinions. And at times, they can kind of appear a little bit maybe standoffish. Reflective, they express opinions, but they do so in a very deliberate, thoughtful manner. They tend to think and wait until they really have their ideas formulated, which again sometimes makes them seem like maybe they're a little standoffish or preoccupied, because they're kind of constantly processing things and trying to figure out the best way to approach things. Supportive styles, they listen very attentively. They are pretty expressive in decisions, but they do so in a very thoughtful manner. They really kind of take into consideration, and not that other people don't, but they focus on kind of the needs and the wants and the emotions of other people when they're kind of communicating and making decisions. So as you're watching different people, you can kind of see their preferred communication style. If you think about Jimmy Fallon and where he fits in terms of the dominance and sociability and being able to style flex, it's kind of interesting as you watch some of these figures and how they do things. kind of some words of warning. Don't stereotype, don't kind of pigeonhole people into, well, this is the way salespeople are, and this is the way teachers are, and this is the way, because they're not all the same. They have maybe projected that because they've learned how to style and flex and all those types of things, but for the most part, they still have their own personal way. We don't conform to anyone's style. We have traits of all of those. Again, it's just the one that we seem to feel most comfortable with. And communication style is just one piece of all of our personality and all of our strengths and all of our weaknesses. It's just something to be aware of. I kind of think of my grandmother. She was someone who was high sociability and high dominance. But at the same time, when I watched her communicate, she had learned through the course of her life how to take her style to match the styles of others. And she was really great at asking questions and a real interest in the other person. She would always talk about their family, where they came from, what they did for a living. She would find out a lot about a person, total strangers, within about 10 or 15 minutes. And she was able to connect with them in a way that I haven't seen very many people be able to do. So when we look at communication styles, we operate in kind of different zones. Zone 1 is pretty low intensity. When we meet someone who kind of resides permanently in Zone 1, it can be really hard to identify what their communication style is. Zone 2, it's a little bit easier because you see more intensity, it's more obvious. And then those people who are in the excess zone, they're way out there in terms of their communication style. It's easy to identify. The real problem comes when people are there consistently with high intensity and they're rigid in their style. They don't like to move from their style. And those people sometimes can be really hard to communicate with. We all can move into the excess zone. When things aren't going well because of a stressful work situation, when we don't feel well, if we sense threats in our workplace or in our relationships, we tend to move into our excess zone, and it leads to a breakdown in communication because we tend to be more inflexible. So then the book will go in and talk about behaviors that can be displayed in the excess zone, and they go style by style. So those are things that you can kind of look through, read through. When we look at style identification, what things should we look for? Not just how they're communicating verbally, but nonverbal clues can help us as well. Someone who is in the reflective style is going to project a more serious tone. They're going to sit back, they're going to watch, they're going to observe, they're going to listen. Someone who is emotive is going to be using their hands, lots of emotion. The one thing too is, don't rush to identify because again, someone may not be feeling well. So in the first meetings of people, don't think you can kind of guess right away what they are. You got to continue to gather information, reassess, because it might just be the situation that's causing them to act that way. Third dimension of all of this, being able to be versatile, being able to, operate independent of our preferred communication style. Again, being able to change, to meet, to adapt to the situation and the people that we're being around. One of the things too is with style flexing, it is us changing our communication style to meet the style of the people around us. It is temporary, and it's a way of building a relationship. So the style flexing at work, there's a case example in the book where it's talking about emotive versus reflective, and then how you can kind of flex your styles to meet the needs in those situations. The book is going to talk about adapting your style to others. So if you have to flex to meet the style of the emotives, there's the list of things that you can do. For the directives, and again, these are in the book, so you can look through these and kind of read through them. and again, figure out if I am talking to someone who's reflective but I'm emotive, what things do I need to do to meet their needs. Same with flexing for supportive. Again, don't label another person and assume that tells you everything you need to know. Again, the book's going to emphasize this total person concept. And don't even label yourself, because again, we change depending on situation, depending on mood, depending on conditions. And it's best to keep in mind that these are the ways we like to communicate. There isn't a right or wrong way to communicate. And as a matter of fact, having a little bit of each style makes you a better communicator. Where we run into problems is if we rely too much on our strengths and we don't ever really work on our weaknesses, or we're incapable or unwilling to develop new communication skills so we become more versatile. Those are where our real problems